Hello everyone, this is China Paradigm, where we, Dashi Consulting, interview seasoned entrepreneurs in China. The founder and manager of Pourquoi Pas, a marketing and innovation consultancy, focusing recently can tell us about over maybe 2 years, 4 years, about food, cooking, culinary activities, mixed with innovation and consulting, what you have done for 15 years, I think, even more, within big companies at Danone, GSK, and for your clients as a consulting firm. You are based in China, initially in Beijing and then in Shanghai, and food is big business in China. When we look at the numbers, we can see that imported food has been rising, and last year, 2017, $58.3 billion of food and beverage from outside of China has been imported, and that's an increase of 25% from 2016 to 2017. So there is a huge demand for good food. It's key for Chinese to actually understand how food is cooked in a restaurant. It's key for them also to cook themselves and to eat well. And that has been part of the culture in China. Maybe that's also the link with the French culture and with Europe and France generally speaking. Thank you very much for being with us. So first of all, could you explain more about how you came up with this idea of using food and to build a connection on innovations and talk about innovations with your clients?
Thank you, Matthieu. Thank you very much for having me today. Well, indeed, food is a pretty universal thing, and more specifically, it's a very strong feature of my original culture, the French culture that everybody knows. And I happen to be living in a country where also it's very central to the culture. This is when people gather around food, they have serious discussions around food, the way food is purchased, the way it's put together, the way it's presented, all of that matters a lot. And then to answer your question, it's of the crossroads of my two areas of expertise. I have a 20-year career in innovation. That's my business expertise and passion. And as you mentioned, I had a corporate career before setting up my own company 10 years ago, which is Pourquoi Pas, innovation consultancy. And it happens that on the side, my personal hobby has always been cooking. This is, I consider that this new expertise on cooking is the present that China gave me. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. Because it's really when I came to China that I started making cooking part of my professional life. And I've led countless workshops with my clients, helping them to be more creative, to improve their innovation projects, and to push their innovation competencies a little bit further. And I kept thinking that there should be another way of talking about innovation that is not the project itself, the corporate environment itself. You know, it's a famous saying by Albert Einstein that problems cannot be solved within the framework in which they were created. When the human brain faced with a problem, you need to take it outside of its original context in order to find new solutions. This is one of the features of creativity, is this ability to go sideways, to change playgrounds. And I just naturally, my two worlds collided, and I thought, well, surely there's something with being in the kitchen. This is an area where all the skills that are needed for innovation can be experienced, and also all the barriers that I could see my clients bumping into, all of those we can break down in the context of the kitchen. You know, the fear of failing is one of the biggest barriers for innovation. And culturally in China, this is a very, very big one, not losing faith. And in the context of the kitchen, everything becomes so familiar and so playful. Everyone has a kitchen. Everyone has been in a kitchen at some stage. So I started developing my two activities and putting them together, and it's been wonderful.
So, for some people who are in consulting and innovation, they know about serious games, serious play, like a Lego play workshop where you use a Lego, where you are going to do serious play, serious game, in order to build on innovation and to see who could be your partner, who could be your competitor with those Lego game and so on. The first time I heard about that, I was a bit surprised that we could use this kind of game to actually help people to innovate and think about the environment. How do you use cooking, food, putting together a team to work on a recipe, maybe a new recipe, maybe an old recipe, or maybe building an old recipe from an old recipe and then creating a new one, adapting to a market? How could you help us understand how it helped putting people together and bring them to innovate? I would add one more thing. I interviewed previously someone who worked on the Guide Michelin, Florent, and he told me that the restaurants now they need to have three criteria to be successful. One of them being playful. Second is to be good food, good material, and also to be digitally savvy. But the first one was to be playful. So I believe there is something around food to build community, to play playful, to build team. But you go further, because you say it's not only to build team, is to innovate together. Would you mind giving some examples of how it can happen?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's fantastic you quoted playful again, because I spontaneously used the word in my previous statement, and that's one of the huge values of the kitchen. And you quoted Lego. That's also what they do. They take people back to their childhood. So you remove all the barriers about I've got this big project and I absolutely need to perform and my career depends on it, and there are big numbers involved. You remove all of that. You're into a new universe, where a universe of possibilities, of open mind and enjoyment. The pressure of the business life makes it very difficult for team members to have fun, quite honestly. So one of the huge values of being in a kitchen is that. But I'll take it step by step, really. So first of all, the way I handle a client brief is always tailor-made. In order to be really to deliver results for a specific team, I really use all of my experience of working with various industries, all sorts of companies, small, medium, large, multinational, and I understand deeply what is needed in that specific situation in the context of a specific innovation project with that industry and that company culture. And I would design something completely unique, both in the kitchen and in a workshop that happens most of the time a little bit before and certainly after the experience in the kitchen. And that's the only way to make it 100% efficient. So there's no, it's not one size fits all. It's not, it's like a recipe. I create a specific recipe, literally and figuratively, for every single brief. And what I would ask the teams to do depends on the objective. Like on Sunday, for instance, I handled a team building event for a team of 72 people, so a very large team. And the objective of the client was to bring different functions together and to to help them to work better. They have different objectives, very different cultures. So I divided sub-teams, making sure that all the functions were mixed. And I designed a workshop in the kitchen where people had to do, they had two objectives. Each team had two objectives. One was to replicate a dish that I demonstrated. And then the other objective was for them to cook something creatively together. So there was the reassurance of getting started on something a little bit easier. They had to do again what they had seen me cook. So that was a way of helping them to get started. And then the energy in the room was incredible already at that stage. And people were very enthusiastic about seeing the result, because that's one of the beauties of cooking, is that it's tangible. You start with separate ingredients, and after 45 minutes, you have a dish that can feed people. It's there, it exists, and it's useful. There's a huge amount of pride, and this is a very simple to understand human benefit. You've really produced something useful together. So the teams were all energized and enthusiastic in the room, and then they really surprised me at how fast and how easily they started the second objective, which was to create a dish. They had all a huge basket of ingredients, and they could do whatever they wanted. It was a vegetable side dish, and I gave no other criteria. Just make it look beautiful and taste delicious. That was it. And the level of enthusiasm was amazing at the end of the workshop. So that's one example. But then I can also work more deeply on a single competency. It can be creativity. It can be time management. It can be the ability to assign clear responsibilities and to stick to that. That's one of the usual flaws in innovation processes, that the roles are not clearly defined, or people get rid of some of their responsibilities as they go along because it feels uncomfortable. So it all depends on the company's specific challenges.
I understand the part which is duplicating your work. Let's maybe skip this one and to focus on the one of innovation. So how do you manage it? Do you ask them to write down how they are going to cook first together in team, so they have an idea of where they're innovative, where they copy, when they copy, how to actually copy a bit differently to bring a bit of innovation? We say that Picasso said actually every innovation is kind of copying someone else. It's known that you need to copy to learn after how to innovate. And how do you organize it for a specific case in order to make it a learning experience, and not only a fun experience, because I believe that it's about learning how to innovate. One more thing that I feel, which is very interesting, I didn't feel at the beginning, I didn't understand that, but that's true that in most team building activity, people don't come up with some things they build together. And here, you come up with something you build together, so that's why you can actually connect with innovation. And second thing is, you make innovation easy to access again. You make innovation like a final product at the end of the session. And innovation is very seen in the world as something very complicated, something technological, something hard, something lengthy, something which is going to be actually very far away from yourself. When you're a marketing manager, when you're a finance manager, when you're a logistic manager, innovation seems to be very far from you. It seems to be for startup, or it seems to be for the big boss, but maybe not for yourself. And you make it more closer to each person. So could you please describe a bit more different processes? We understand they innovate with their own recipe, but how do you organize it to make it a learning experience?
So as I said, it all depends on the specific objectives, but where the learning is really crystallized is in a workshop that follows the experience in the kitchen and that I facilitate. So that's where we all sit down. We've had an experience in the kitchen, and I designed it so that it pushes some specific skills. So whether it's pure creativity that can be done with, then I ask the teams to to create something, and I could give specific adjectives that I can draw on what's happening at this point in time in the company, and give the teams a basket of ingredients and then 2 adjectives, and they have to create a dish that represents those 2 adjectives. And then it can also get the teams thinking in a creative and in a strategic way already. So that there are really very strong parallels with an innovation brief. But that is all made to measure according to the client's needs. So that's the kitchen part. But then we sit down, and it can be, I like it to be on the same day, because all the learnings are still fresh. If it's the following day, we lose some of it. So typically we sit down, and then I facilitate a session where we reflect on what happened, and I lead the discussion on individually, how was it for you, and ask people to make notes as they go during the kitchen experience. And as sub teams, most of the time we have sub teams, but I can do a single cooking experience for a team of 10, for instance. That's manageable as one whole team, but usually I split a bigger team into sub teams. So and I take back everything that the teams report, and we reflect together. And then that's when I draw the parallel with a specific project happening at that point in time, or a specific challenge. And we can have other exercises. I use my experience of workshops, and I can use other techniques to push the thinking. We can go into building on insights, and it can be extremely powerful for companies who are working in the food and beverage industry. Of course, that is very, very easy to move from what happened in the kitchen into the real world. We can be literal sometimes. We've worked on a specific product, and it can create some specific business ideas. But of course, that's the perfect echo. So that's really when things happen after the kitchen experience, with a more classical workshop approach and deeper discussions.
What would be an adjective you would use to actually give a direction for a recipe? Because I believe it could not be like sweet, because the people are going to put sugar everywhere. What kind of adjective you could be used in a creative brief that actually can be reused in a recipe in order to actually embody this innovation brief? You could share a bit of examples.
Yes, that can be disruptive. And I would
disruptive, right?
Yes. That would be a really good one for a company that wishes to push the team's creativity and to lead them to think out of the box, which once again, in the context of a real innovation project, is so difficult. I mean, this is the déjà vu expression everywhere, but how do you think out of the box when you're in your office and you've got reports all around you, and you've been looking at this problem for the past months? It's the only way is to take it out of its context. So that's a very powerful one. And then as a professional cook myself, I know how I would help the teams in the kitchen to make sure that they really produce something. And I would design the basket of ingredients so that disruption is possible. Mixing savory and sweet is an obvious one, but also helping them to push the presentation. Say, okay, well, your initial team idea is to cook an omelette. How will you make it look different? How will it taste different? What about the color, the smell, the shape? I can help them to push their ideas further. And then they are the first ones surprised, saying, oh, wow, we never thought we could produce that when we started. And that's where what you described earlier, make it happen. This huge sense of empowerment and possibility and pride that has happened within the frame of 3 hours, because that's the time frame of cuisine, which is not the time frame of any company project. There's nothing below 6 months. So within a few hours, we create a sense of possibility and this sense of power in a team.
Are there other formats you are using? I understand that you are using this format about creating their own recipe, also cooking yourself. Are there other formats you are using to fuel this energy of innovation through food, generally speaking? Maybe it could be health and cooking, but generally speaking, do you have other formats?
Well, cooking is a very powerful one, but then in my career of innovation consultant, I've used other activities out of the office always. I mean, one of the tools that I also really like is what I call a retail safari. So we go on the field as sub-teams. We visit shops, sometimes, always, I should say, not related to the original category. And the team is equipped with notepads, and they have clear objectives always of recording, taking pictures, writing down adjectives, potential insights that they're trying to guess behind what they see on the shelves. But it's, once again, it's a direct experience of something different. And I also encourage the teams to use their five senses, which is one of the things I also say very often in the kitchen. So that's another example of a tool that takes the teams out of their context, opens their minds, and get them fresh ideas, it's not even ideas at the start of it. It's just new clues, new things, new facts. And then what matters is what we do with them. And once again, this is then me sitting with them and all of us working as a team on exploiting all of the materials.
We talk about food, creating recipe to eat. You have been working in the drink industry, with Danone, for instance, and you know this industry for your own clients at Pourquoi as well. Do you think that this could be duplicated as well with drinks? We see more and more innovation with small companies creating their own juice, their own drinks easily. Is it also part of the experience? Juice could be an easy drink to create within a couple of hours, or a cocktail, or something to drink. Has it been part also of building a class of innovation, or is it something you could build on?
I definitely could. Strangely enough, I've not yet done a cooking workshop where we would literally create a product. It's always been a sort of a transversal approach, but absolutely. This is obvious. But then I would definitely design a lot of preparation so that what we do in the kitchen is leveraging actual insight, actual market facts, using ingredients that have legs to them. So but it absolutely could be done, and I look forward to doing that, to taking it really very literally. I could work with coffee companies, creating new aromas, juices, and everything that is mixed is an obvious brief for this type of experiment, because we can really try and test many options and open up and work on textures, ingredients. It's a fast track innovation process in that case, bringing all the important people together in a room, working across functions and actually making things happen.
That's a very good transition. For one of the key questions I had for you is, how do you leverage your understanding of innovation in big companies? Again, GSK, huge company. Danone, very big company. You have worked, one of your clients at Pourquoi is Innocent, for instance. They are all big companies, and their innovation process is look for someone from outside, like a very complicated, with a lot of parts, very political as well inside process. How do you bring this experience from big companies to actually a workshop and to shake a little bit those big companies from now outside, because you are outside those companies and those big companies and you work with them? So what do you take from this experience? What do you take from your consulting experience? What do you take from your China experience and so many countries you have been in, because you have traveled actually in many countries, you have lived in many countries, all together to bring an effective innovation?
Well, I think it's almost easier when you come from the outside. One of the key success factors for innovation is that it should come from the top. There is no way a major change or a very new idea can happen within a company if it doesn't come from the very top of the organization. It will get killed 3 times before it it sees the day of light. So I'm always briefed by the leadership team, so that gives me credibility to start with, and then, as you said, yes, I've been very lucky to have worked in many different industries: cosmetics, drinks, airports, banking, services. I mean, it's varied and across cultures. Obviously France, but then I lived for 10 years in the UK, then the Middle East, now China. So I guess it all, it's a little bit like a dish. You cannot, when it's very good, you can't always identify the individual ingredients and the various spices. It just all went into the pot at different stages, and it sort of works together at the end. And I guess that's how I feel. Like I come to a workshop and a project with a lot of passion and all of my experience, but I don't feel the individual aspect. Sometimes I'm reminded of a specific project because I recognize that I'm facing the same difficulty that I did in the past, but most of the time it's not even conscious. Yes.
What about a framework? What about some frameworks, some tools you have been learning at GSK, at Danone, at those big companies, or from your work with some clients that you're reusing? I'm thinking for us at Dash Consulting, we use, for instance, a lean canvas. We may use the topics of the lean startup and the 4 steps to the epiphany. That kind of frameworks we like. We like iterative models where we innovate on an MVP, member of a product. Do you have some framework you are reusing from this experience with big companies that you are using in China? And is there a China specificity? Is this something with your workshop around food as well? Could you elaborate a bit more what you got from this experience working in and with big companies for innovation in terms of tools, framework? Because innovation, to elaborate more, sorry for that, but innovation seems like a art. So it seems like it can go nowhere, but it can go exactly where you want to go to make it big. And I remember Peter Drucker saying that entrepreneurship is neither an art, neither a science, it's a practice. But what about innovation? Is it a science? Is it an art? Is it a practice? Do you need framework? Do you use frameworks? So would you mind sharing a bit more about your view of what innovation is and what tools can be useful?
Yes, with pleasure. I insist always on approaching a brief with a very unique set of tools. So I always think back and listen very carefully to my clients, and the process that I suggest to them is always made to measure. But if I'm honest, there are steps that are always there, and it's a very good question. And I would say 2 things. One obsession of mine as a marketeer, and as it should be, is to put whoever is the consumer of the product or the service at the very core of the innovation process. So that is always there, always. And it's one thing that I constantly remind the teams about. So that's one. It's not even a tool, it's a state of mind. It's absolutely mandatory. And then I tend to be quite systematic about approaching a specific project or a business. I look at all the corners. That's also something that I do all the time. And whatever the corners are, they may differ by industry. But I'm in my mind, I picture a landscape, and I'm obsessed about making sure that I've looked behind each tree of this landscape, that we haven't ignored what's happening for competition. And I take competition always with a very wide approach, and seeing it with the eyes of the consumer. Sometimes we define competition in a much too narrow way. I tend to think of a specific product or service with the eyes of the consumers, and think, okay, what else could replace that for me? And then you really define competition, and sometimes there are surprises. But so, yes, making sure that we looked at that, making sure we've looked at the legal context. It's not always the most glamorous part, but it's critical. So this is the second tool, using this sort of a 360 consideration of a specific situation. So those are the two approaches that I always use. And then the process I design for my client is always unique. And then China specifics. Yes.
Yeah, true. One thing I wanted to add on is the legal context. Very often people think innovation, I think a bit in an artistic way. So they think that it's going to be purely creative, out of the context, out of the world, with no roots, and they don't think that there are legal constraints. I remember when I was at ESSEC Business School, an entrepreneurship class, one of the students said, oh, we could use a subway to deliver products, and people would come in the subway with a big product on their shoulders, and then deliver to someone who has just bought like an IKEA or whatever furniture. And then the professor said, yeah, but do you think that's legal? And do you think really the corporation which is managing the subway, the metro, is going to agree that people can bring those big furniture inside the subway? So the legal context indeed is something which is sometimes overlooked by people doing innovation, but it's key. One more thing, you say that you focus on the consumer. And I'm surprised that you don't use those big words like design thinking. Because what say design thinking is to focus on the consumer. Is it because you don't like those big words like design thinking, lean canvas? You think they're actually shrinking a bit the thinking? Or is it because you want to stay free? There is a reason for that?
No, I think those are very good concepts, very good approaches, if they are used in the right way. I'm always trying to make sure that I start wide, and then I go in more specifically into tools. So I'm always trying to look at a broad perspective before coming back to specific tools. And why not design? I mean, it depends on the category. It can be extremely powerful. And I think it's completely aligned with what I'm doing. There are lots of commonalities, for instance, with cooking, or even with my philosophy of putting consumers at the core. That's very much what a design approach would do, is go back to what's happening at the point of consumption, like when the product is used. So that's the same. I see absolutely no contradiction. It's just I don't want to move too quickly into execution in my approach. That would be my answer.
So I cut it at the time when you wanted to talk about China more specifically, and you work in China compared to your work outside of China, and your past experience, which has been in big groups outside of China, GSK and Danone, were experiences outside of China. How does it compare with China?
It's obvious that the culture here is very different, and it still astonishes me every day. I mean, the speed of the market here, whatever the category, this amazing hunger for learning that the Chinese culture can really boast about. Many features that are very impressive. What I've felt in terms of innovation, working here in the context of China, I've really felt the benefit of my side approach and working in the kitchen especially, because there's culturally there's a very specific approach to hierarchy. and to losing face in front of the team. The team dynamic here is very, very different from the dynamics that I've experienced in the US or in Europe or even in the Middle East. So it's been actually, I think I may be at the best place with my kitchen approach to innovation, because cooking does a lot to those barriers. It's very powerful. So it's a good thing for me.
I see. So you see one of the key differences that's very interesting at relationships between people. How do you manage conflict? How do you manage confrontation? How do you manage disagreement? You see there is a big difference between your experience in China and in the Western speaking, because you have been working in Middle East, in Europe, and in the UK, continental Europe. So you feel that this is one of the keys. You said speed of innovation, speed of conception, speed of learning, but this could be a context as well, maybe not as much as culture, but it could be a context of opening up and so on, China, economic context. But the one which is very linked to culture and where roots could be much deeper is actually the way you handle relationship with hierarchy, the way you handle relationship with your when you disagree, with confrontation, which could be good for the company, in fact, which could be good for the society or company, the people you work with or you live with. So this is one of the big difference you assess, right?
Yes, absolutely. But speed, yes, and there's a context. I mean, this is obviously a massive country and growing in some categories. But I do believe, with everything that I've seen, and I wouldn't pretend that I know China well after 4 years, but I do believe there's a cultural element to this speed. Is that something about the Chinese culture is really turned towards improving and learning and understanding. So I've worked a little bit in the wine industry, for instance, and it's close to my cooking expertise, of course. And what the wine industry has seen here in China over the past years is absolutely unbelievable. There's been a development, like in a few years. What happened here happened in several decades in other countries. So, and Chinese people are learning about wines at an incredible speed. They are several masters of wines now in China, and just the general knowledge has moved from zero to expertise, I would dare to say, in just 15 years. So I think there's still something cultural, and that's one of the things that absolutely fascinates me about this country, and when I'm so happy to live here.
So again, it's a very good transition for one other question I had is, you arrived in China 4 years ago? Or 5?
Yes,
4 years ago. 4 years ago. What was the most surprising facts you assessed at that time? And I think it's a very precious time when you come into a new country, especially China. You arrive in China during the first 6 months. That's always the first 6 months I'm very interested by. The first 6 months of Alibaba, the first 6 months of Microsoft, the first 6 months of Apple, the first 6 months in China. So the first 6 months in China, what did you observe, assessed that was very different and surprising from the West, where you could actually find there are opportunities, there are things to do and so on from a business society perspective, which companies, brands have to take into account, otherwise they could fail. They could not understand the market. What has been surprising to you is that it could be a good learning for someone who is listening to this show?
So when I first came to China, I was living in Beijing, and since then, as you mentioned, I moved to Shanghai. But so Beijing was a very good city to start with. It's less open, less foreign than Shanghai is. and I think what really surprised me in my first 6 months was that I could not label anything. I couldn't, every single adjective I was tempted to use, I could also use another one or the opposite just 2 meters away. And I think this is one of the difficulties that a lot of Westerners have with this country, is that it's obviously huge. And so it has to be very fragmented, but it's also, everything has moved at a different pace as what we are used to. So one minute you see a street food vendor with very dubious hygiene, and then the next minute you realize that he's got a digital business and he can deliver his food, and actually with 5 different flavors, and each flavor you can also customize with 5 different ingredients, and he can deliver at the other side of the city within 30 minutes. And then you think, oh, so what is that business exactly? Is it a tiny, poor business, or is it already one of the fastest moving one? You can never label what you observe. It keeps escaping the vocabulary that you have at your disposal, because it's not black or white. Things happen in a different way, at a different pace, and sometimes some of the most advanced steps that you wouldn't see in the UK or in France, they've already happened here and they are advanced, but some of the previous steps are just missing because no one is interested now. So it's very difficult to gather and to, which makes it so fascinating, because I still want to understand and to put words on things that I see, but I often can't. So those were my first impressions. And also something about the Chinese culture that I really, really like, and it's sometimes overlooked, is that there's a deep interest for people here. Yes, it's a very commercial driven country, but when you meet people at an individual level, they are interested in who you are deeply. When I started cooking, and I did some classes with a Chinese interpreter, and I exchanged a lot with food bloggers and some food experts in this country who vlog and blog, and they were asking questions to me that were going beyond the technique of cooking. They wanted to know me. They had a very holistic approach to who I was, and a very clear curiosity for who I was. So I do believe there's the opportunity for everyone coming here to really establish relationships, and true human relationships with their Chinese teammates or counterparts.
Very interesting that you use the word holistic, because it is it's often said that the approach of truth, the approach of contract, the approach of relationship is holistic in China, where in the West it's segmented, where you are going to segment into different items, different articles in a contract, where the holistic approach of a contract is we are going to work together and we are going to make it work, but in the specificities we don't know the future, so we cannot really assess. We do that this time. Now we sign this contract now because of the context, because it's changing, the contract may change. So a very Western approach, which is to divide work, and we focus on work, we focus on the workshop, we focus on the food you are teaching, and then we don't talk about private life, we don't talk about who you are and so on. But indeed, in a Chinese perspective, you tend to have a much more holistic approach. That's very interesting. Actually, I didn't put this word on it, but it's very, very interesting remark. And to label what you have in front of you, it's always difficult in China, indeed, because the world is so different. So it's difficult to put the words, which are Western words, on what you see. I'd like to talk now about innovation. Do you see in the way Chinese innovate versus the way Western people innovate, a big difference. McKinsey said, some reports said that Chinese tend to have a go-to-market which is faster. So they test actually and innovate with the market, actually in a way which is much more design thinking in some way, because they tested with the consumer. Whereas in Europe, or in the West, we had much more R&D DNA, or very engineered DNA, where the products need to be refined, perfect, then we launch it. Maybe nobody wants it, but we launch it. So that's one of the differences that people think of innovation between West and China. What has been your perspective of how Chinese innovate and the West is innovating?
Yes, I can fully second this based on my observations and practices. In the West, we need plans, and usually senior leadership has asked for a clear plan. It can be even up to a 5-year plan. This is totally exotic to a Chinese mind. How on earth would you build a 5-year plan when you don't even know what in 5 months your own market will look like, because things change that fast here. And also, we just, in the West, we tend to ignore that things change this fast, because we like planning. We need the security of the next step, and underneath the next step, there has to be a very set of actions that are very well distributed to individuals within the company. And then only we feel that, yes, we can go ahead. We know what we are doing. It's all laid out. It's structured, so we can go. And of course, the Chinese approach is completely different. It's a lot more fluid. There needs to be a sense of objective, what we are after, but then how to do it, we will design it as we start doing it. So there's walk and chat at the same time, and progress. So of course, for me as an innovation professional, I design the discussions in a very, very different way, and I take into account the fact that here the culture doesn't require such a rigorous planning. It's still very important to have a sense of objective and a sense of who does what, who gets started. But then there needs to be a lot of sort of a suppleness and the space for a lot of agility and constant check with the real world and what's happening out there. And I think it's very wise. So I feel very comfortable in adjusting this way.
Yeah, in a way, it's what design thinking is, and to test with the customers, the consumers, the use. So China is in some way modern in the way it's innovating. Now we are heading to the end of the talk, and we have those usual 10 questions. So maybe we're not going to ask all of them, but we have a few questions we usually ask at the end. So, what books inspired you most in your entrepreneurial journey in building Pourquoi Pas? Or in China,
I would have answered. Yes, yeah. There's a book that that have really helped me a lot in approaching the Chinese culture. It's called The Paradox of the Red Fish, and I will send the details separately. But it's a short book written by someone who deals with philosophy, so it has a lot of depth. And to me, that was my best help on looking at the Chinese culture, because it provided me with different words, different tools, and it explained to me that I had to change the whole frame of my thinking in order to observe things here. So that's definitely my recommendation.
What do you read to stay up to it about China?
Ooh, it's not reading for China. I go out on the street, I open doors, I look at cafes, restaurants, I observe people out there. I think everything that is written is already too late. So it's a direct experience.
Is it that you randomly walk sometimes in the city to explore, to discover, or is it that you already know where to go and you want precisely to see something new you have heard about or you have seen in the press?
I do a bit of both, of course, and I always approach things with a sense of networking. I listen to other people's advice, and I make notes of addresses. I've got countless memos in my phone where I've made notes of something, a place that someone mentioned. So that's what I do. But I also believe in the power of random exploration, especially in a city like in the two cities that I've lived in China, both Beijing and Shanghai. Things change so fast that even the street where you were walking in last month looks different today. So a bit of both.
If you had the extra time, what would you like to create, to build, to do, Chinese speaking?
I would love to go to other Chinese cities. I mean, Shanghai and Beijing are already so big that it takes all my time. But I would love to explore. I mean, I've visited other cities, but I would love to also work there, to develop a business there, like Chengdu, fascinating city, and very interesting cuisine culture too, of course. Hangzhou, Shenzhen. I mean, I would love to be able to embrace more of the size of this country, but of course, everything is so big, and there's already so much to do for me just where I am now in Shanghai that I haven't yet found the time.
True, China is very big, and people don't realize that Shandong is, I think, more populated than Germany, for instance. So that can give the sense of how many cities can exist, how many million people cities can exist in China. That's actually mind blowing when we think about it. What unexpected success have you witnessed in China? You wouldn't have expected something which has grown big, which has been very successful. The reason why I'm asking this question, and we talked about it before we started the interview, or maybe at the beginning of the interview, it's that Peter Drucker assessed, the famous thinker of management and so on, assessed innovation through unexpected failure or unexpected success. And because there is an unexpected success or unexpected failure, he's thinking there is something changing in the market. There is innovation here. What is unexpected success? So that's to go back to the question, have you witnessed in China, which was really a surprise for you?
I would say yogurt. And of course, I will stay in the food category because this is close to my heart. But today, the yogurt category in this country is huge. And I'm confident enough to say that maybe 10 years ago, we would have asked even people who claim being experts of this market they would have said there's no way yogurt can succeed here. It's dairy, which people historically do not consume here. It's cold, and there's something about the Chinese medicine that says that, cold food for you is not good, especially in winter. I mean, see in Beijing how many yogurts are consumed every day during the famously cold, freezing Beijing winter. And then it's a nightmare in terms of logistics. Yogurt, it's a fresh product. How do you stock it? And same, you see vendors on the street everywhere in Beijing, and it's so that's for me a good example that things can happen here despite a lot of reasons why they shouldn't. And I guess there's a combination of health benefits and a certain capacity to embrace novelty here, which will keep surprising us, I believe. Let's see what the champagne category is. Let's see where it's going, because it could also be a big surprise. It's not supposed to be a likable product in the Chinese culture, but I already mentioned that the wine business has completely exploded. So what's the next step?
Interesting, very interesting. And indeed, people who live in Beijing can see, let's say in Nalugoxiang, for instance, those shops with yogurt, where 10 years back we had to give them back actually the cup because they wanted to get, yeah, the part to get it back. We get back the part of the money. What unexpected failure have you witnessed in China? And you couldn't have actually thought about before you came to China, which was surprising. I mean, in the business, in the society, in the economy. One of the failure I witnessed when I'm in China is the failure of Carrefour. When I arrived in China 10 years ago, Carrefour was a fast-growing company, was a successful company, and it has failed by not being digitalized, by not being in the city, and to have a model based on the car, where you come with your car, you put everything in your, you put all everything you bought in the car, and you go back home.
Yes, that's one that is really also close to my heart, because of course this is a beautiful French company. So I would definitely have quoted this one. Also in the category of cosmetics, yet another famous French company has failed in some segments because of the local competition and once again this amazing capacity that some Chinese companies have demonstrated at mastering the quality of the products, and also understanding deeply the insights. So it's no longer enough to have a bit of exotism and coming from the West, and even the Frenchness of a proposition. This is still noticed, and it's there's a shortcut for quality and a certain sense of elegance and history, but it's just not enough. And I think no Western brand, or French more specifically, but no Western brand can be arrogant enough to just turn up in China and expect that people will buy just because it comes from outside. And unfortunately, those few examples are painful reminders that this is a very demanding market here. It's segmented, and precisely segmented, and people want quality and want value for money.
True. Thank you very much, Sandrine, for your time. Thanks for sharing with us. So I hope that everyone enjoyed the talk. A few words about China Paradigm. If you like it, please follow us on Apple Podcast, on Himalaya now. We are on Himalaya too. It has been a couple of days. We are on Himalaya, and we are on Spotify. We are on all the platforms. Follow us. We have also a newsletter, and we are going to have a seminar soon, mid-December, early January, two sessions on brand independence. How do you get independent from the marketplaces, from Tmall, from JD, which are actually taking some margin out of your brand, and also which are trading your clients, trading to others, your databases. So please, if you like the show, follow us, like it, comment it, and please continue to listen to us. Talk soon. Bye.